Sometimes the greatest courage is showing kindness when the world calls you a fool. Sometimes saving what nobody else wants can save you. In a dusty frontier town where compassion is mistaken for weakness, 62-year-old Cyrus Bell finds a starving donkey tied to a post with a heartbreaking note, "Not wanted." The other ranch hands mock him for taking it in. They call him soft, foolish. But when Cyrus discovers something hidden beneath the animal's matted fur, an old brand, a scar, a detail only he remembers, everything changes. This donkey once belonged to his late wife, stolen in a raid that shattered his world. What will Cyrus do when saving this rejected creature becomes his last chance at redemption? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Arizona Territory stretched wide and unforgiving under an endless sky, where the earth baked red beneath the sun and survival depended on strength, practicality, and knowing your place. Hollow Creek wasn't much to speak of. A scattered collection of weathered buildings, a general store, a saloon, and a church that saw more dust than devotion. But it was home to the Double Bar K Ranch, and the Double Bar K was where Cyrus Bell had spent the last 12 years of his life trying to forget. He rose before dawn, as he always did, when the world was still painted in shades of grey and the only sounds were the restless shifting of horses in their stalls. At 62, his body carried the accumulated weight of hard years, a stiffness in his left knee from a bad fall, shoulders that ached when the weather turned, hands gnarled from rope and leather and endless labor. But he moved with the steady deliberation of a man who knew his work, who took pride in doing things properly even when no one was watching. The bunkhouse was a long, low building that smelled of tobacco, old sweat, and the particular loneliness of men who lived without roots. Cyrus kept to the corner bunk, the one farthest from the stove, where he could watch the door and keep his business to himself. He owned little: a change of clothes, a razor that had belonged to his father, a few books with broken spines that he read by candlelight when sleep wouldn't come, and in the pocket of his work shirt pressed close to his heart, a faded tin-type photograph wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the elements. He took it out sometimes in the early morning darkness before the other men stirred. The image had dulled with time, the edges worn soft from handling, but he could still make out her face, Sarah, his wife. She stood in front of their modest homestead, her hair pulled back beneath a simple bonnet, her smile bright despite the hardness of frontier life. And in her arms, cradled like a child, a young donkey foal with oversized ears and gentle eyes. Cyrus had met Sarah Bell, born Sarah Mitchell, at a church social in Tucson, 22 years past. She'd been serving pie, and he'd been too nervous to speak properly, fumbling his words like a schoolboy, though he was already 40. But she'd laughed not at him, but with genuine warmth, and asked if he'd like a second slice. They were married 4 months later in that same church. With wildflowers she'd picked herself and a simple gold band he'd saved 6 months to afford. They'd built their homestead on a patch of land 15 miles north of Hollow Creek, near a reliable spring. It wasn't much, a one-room cabin, a small barn, a chicken coop, but it was theirs. Sarah had a gift with growing things, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil and tending herbs that she'd dry and sell in town. She sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs her mother had taught her, and Cyrus would find himself stopping whatever task occupied him just to listen. But it was the animals she truly loved. Sarah couldn't pass a suffering creature without stopping to help. She'd nurse injured birds, feed stray dogs, and once spent 3 days caring for a jackrabbit with a broken leg until it could hop away on its own. The townsfolk thought her peculiar, wasteful of time and resources on things that served no practical purpose. Cyrus thought her beautiful. The donkey foal had come to them half-starved, wandering alone after its mother was killed by a mountain lion. Sarah found it trembling behind their barn one morning and immediately claimed it as her own. She named him Jasper, fed him goat's milk from a bottle, brushed his coat until it shined, and taught him to follow her around the property like a devoted dog. Cyrus had protested at first. What good was a donkey too small for packing, too gentle for serious work? But Sarah had given him that look, the one that was both pleading and utterly certain, and he'd surrendered. Everything deserves a chance. Sigh, she'd told him, scratching behind Jasper's ridiculous ears. Even the small things, especially the small things. She'd been right, as she usually was. Jasper grew into a fine animal, strong enough to carry light loads, patient enough to work alongside them in the garden, and loyal beyond measure. More than that, he made Sarah happy, and her happiness was all Cyrus had ever truly wanted. They'd had 5 good years in that homestead. 5 years of hard work and simple joys, of planning for the future and talking about the children they hoped to have, of building something that mattered. Cyrus had felt for the first time in his rough life that he belonged somewhere, that he was home. Then came the raid. It was late summer, 12 years ago now, though the memory remained sharp enough to cut. A gang of outlaws led by a man named Jack Mercer had been terrorizing the territory for months, stealing livestock, burning property, leaving destruction in their wake. The territorial marshal had posted warnings, but their homestead was isolated, easy to overlook. Cyrus had believed they were safe. He'd been wrong. They came at night, 6 men on horseback, wearing bandanas over their faces and carrying rifles that gleamed in the moonlight. Cyrus had heard the horses and grabbed his shotgun, but Sarah made him promise not to go out shooting. "Let them take what they want," she'd whispered, her hand on his arm. "Things can be replaced, but the outlaws wanted more than things." When Cyrus refused to tell them where he kept his money he'd saved for 3 years, hidden beneath a floorboard, one of them struck Sarah. She fell hard, hitting her head on the corner of their table, and didn't get up. Cyrus had killed 2 of them before the others overpowered him. They beat him until his vision went dark, dragged him outside and set fire to the cabin while he watched. When he finally managed to crawl back inside, Sarah was gone. The smoke had taken her while he'd been helpless to stop it. They stole everything, his horses, their chickens, tools, food stores, and Jasper. They'd roped the young donkey and dragged him away, leaving Cyrus with nothing but ashes and a grief so profound it felt like drowning. The territorial marshal eventually tracked down 3 of the gang members. They hanged 2. The 3rd died in a shootout. Jack Mercer himself vanished, rumored dead in Mexico, though his body was never found. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Sarah was gone, and Cyrus was alone. He'd sold what remained of the land, unable to bear the sight of it, and drifted for a time. Eventually, he found work at the Double Bar K, a large cattle operation that needed experienced hands and didn't ask too many questions about a man's past. The work was hard, and the pay modest, but it kept him busy. Busy meant he didn't have to think, didn't have to feel. The other ranch hands were good men, mostly. Dutch Calloway, the foreman, was a gruff bull of a man in his 50s, with a grey beard and eyes that missed nothing. He ran the operation with military precision and expected every man to pull his weight. He tolerated no laziness, no excuses, but he was fair in his own rough way. Tommy Price was the youngest of the crew, barely 20, with red hair and freckles, and an eagerness that reminded Cyrus of a puppy. The boy worked twice as hard as anyone else, trying to prove himself, and looked up to the older hands with an admiration that was both touching and exhausting. Then there was Emma Hartwell, daughter of the ranch owner. She was 35, never married, and carried herself with a quiet competence that commanded respect. After her mother died 5 years back, she'd taken over managing the ranch's books and supplies, visiting weekly to check on operations. She was kind but not soft, practical but not cold. Cyrus had noticed that she always had a gentle word for the animals, always took time to listen when the hands had concerns. The ranch operated on clear principles: strength, usefulness, productivity. Every animal earned its keep. Every man pulled his share. There was no room for sentiment, no patience for impracticality. It was frontier logic, born of necessity, and Cyrus understood it, even if something in his chest ached at the harshness of it. He'd gained a reputation over the years as soft-hearted. When a calf was born too weak to stand properly, he'd spend extra hours trying to coax it to its feet, while others urged him to put it down. When an old horse went lame, he'd advocate for letting it live out its days in pasture, rather than sending it to slaughter. The other men teased him about it, gently mostly, calling him Mother Bell, or joking that he should have been a preacher instead of a ranch hand. Dutch would shake his head. "You got too big a heart for this work, Bell. Gonna get yourself hurt, caring about things that can't care back." But Cyrus couldn't seem to help himself. Every suffering creature reminded him of Sarah, of her insistence that everything deserved a chance. It was his way of keeping her alive, he supposed. His way of honoring the woman who taught him that strength and gentleness weren't opposites. He kept to himself otherwise. Didn't drink much in town, didn't play cards with the other hands, didn't visit the soiled doves at the saloon. Every Sunday, regardless of weather, he rode to the small cemetery outside Hollow Creek and spent an hour at Sarah's grave, telling her about his week, about the work, about the sky and the seasons and all the small things that made up a life. The other men thought him odd but harmless. They'd learned not to ask about his past, and he'd learned not to offer. It was an arrangement that suited everyone. His days followed a familiar rhythm. Rise before dawn, tend the horses, mend fence, move cattle, whatever Dutch needed. Eat simple meals in silence. Read by candlelight. Sleep when exhaustion finally claimed him. It wasn't much of a life, but it was steady, predictable, safe. Cyrus had convinced himself that this was enough, that he'd made peace with his small existence in the margins of other people's ambitions. He'd convinced himself that the ache in his chest was just part of getting older, that the emptiness was simply the price of survival. He'd convinced himself that he'd never feel anything like hope again. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning in late September, with autumn just beginning to cool the desert air, he found the donkey. The sun had barely cleared the eastern hills when Cyrus walked toward the main corral, a worn rope halter slung over his shoulder. He'd slept poorly, troubled by dreams he couldn't quite remember, and woke with a restlessness that coffee hadn't settled. The morning air carried the sharp scent of sage and the earthy smell of animals, familiar and grounding. He heard the commotion before he saw its cause. Voices carried across the yard, laughter mixed with something crueler. Dutch's deep rumble, Tommy's higher pitch, 3 or 4 other hands, all gathered near the southeast corner of the corral. Cyrus changed direction, curious despite himself. The donkey stood tied to a weathered post, head hanging low, legs trembling with exhaustion. It was a pitiful sight. Ribs showed clearly through dull, matted fur. Sores marked where poorly fitted tack had rubbed the hide raw. An ear hung at an odd angle, probably broken at some point and healed wrong. The animal's eyes were half closed, and its breathing came in shallow gasps that spoke of deep weariness. Around its neck, tied with a length of fraying twine, hung a scrap of parchment that fluttered in the morning breeze. Cyrus moved closer, near enough to read the words scrawled in rough charcoal. "Not wanted. Ain't that the sorriest thing you ever seen?" Dutch said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Some fool left it here overnight, probably hoping we'd take pity and feed it." One of the younger hands, a stocky man named Carson, laughed. "Ain't no good for ridin', haulin', or eatin'. Look at them legs, half-starved and probably full of worms. Best thing would be to put a bullet in it and be done." Tommy stood a little apart from the others, his expression troubled. He was too young, too new to voice an objection, but Cyrus could see the discomfort in the way he shifted his weight and avoided looking at the animal. "Can't have it taking up space and resources," Dutch continued, already moving toward the bunkhouse where he kept his rifle. "I'll handle it quick. Won't feel a thing." Something in Cyrus's chest tightened. He looked at the donkey, really looked at it, and saw past the suffering to the animal underneath, the way it stood despite obvious pain, the quiet dignity in its stillness, the patient acceptance of whatever came next. "I'll take it," Cyrus heard himself say. The laughter stopped. Every man turned to stare at him. "What's that, Bell?" Dutch asked, pausing mid-stride. I said I'll take it. The donkey. I'll care for it on my own time, my own resources. Won't cost the ranch nothing. Carson shook his head, grinning. Belle, that thing's half dead already. You'd be throwing good money after bad. Ain't even useful for pack work in that condition. Don't matter if it's useful, Cyrus said quietly. It deserves better than dying tied to a post. Dutch studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he shrugged. Your funeral. But when it dies on you, and it will, don't come crying about it. And you're still pulling your regular shifts. This fool project of yours don't excuse you from your duties. Understood. The other men drifted away, still chuckling and shaking their heads. Only Tommy lingered, watching as Cyrus approached the donkey and carefully untied the rope from the post. Need help, Mr. Bell? The young man asked. Appreciate the offer, but I'll manage. The donkey barely reacted as Cyrus slipped the halter over its head, carefully avoiding the broken ear. It followed when he tugged gently, its step slow and uneven but willing. They made their way across the yard to an unused stall in the far corner of the barn, away from the main activity. It had once stored hay, but now stood empty, its walls solid and its roof intact. Cyrus spent the next hour making the space comfortable. He spread fresh straw on the floor, hauled buckets of clean water, and brought a small measure of oats from his personal stores. The donkey drank deeply, but approached the food with caution, as if expecting it to be snatched away. When it finally began to eat, taking small, careful bites, Cyrus felt something ease in his chest. He knew the others thought him foolish. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps this animal would die despite his efforts, and he'd have wasted time and resources on nothing. But Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. Everything deserves a chance, Si, even the small things. Especially the small things. As the sun climbed higher, Cyrus set to work examining the donkey more carefully. He needed to understand the extent of its injuries, to know what he was working with. Starting with the head, he ran his hands gently over the animal's face, noting the broken ear, the slight cloudiness in the left eye, the worn teeth that suggested age. Moving down the neck, his fingers encountered thick mats of fur, dirt, and dried blood. The donkey flinched but didn't pull away. Cyrus murmured soft words, the kind of meaningless reassurance you'd offer any frightened creature, and continued his examination. His hand caught on something beneath the matted fur on the left flank. Something raised and hard. A brand, probably. Most working animals carried them. He worked carefully, separating the thick mats, pulling away dried mud and accumulated filth. The mark emerged gradually. Letters, not the usual ranch symbol. Cyrus's heart began to pound as he recognized the shape. S.B. Sarah Bell. His hands stilled. He stared at the brand, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes clearly saw. It couldn't be. It had been 12 years. A dozen years since that night, since the fire, since they dragged the young donkey away into the darkness. The odds of this being the same animal were impossible, weren't they? But there it was. The brand Sarah had insisted on, over his protests that a simple donkey didn't need such marking. She'd wanted Jasper to always carry her initials, to always know he belonged to someone who loved him. Cyrus's vision blurred. His throat tightened. He pressed his forehead against the donkey's neck and let himself remember that terrible night in full detail. The shouting, the smell of smoke, Sarah's still form, and in the chaos, the sound of hoofbeats and the terrified braying of a young donkey being dragged away by rough men who saw it as nothing more than property to be sold or traded. They'd taken Jasper. They'd stolen him along with everything else, and Cyrus had been too consumed by grief to even think about searching for him. He'd assumed the animal was long dead, or so far scattered that recovery was impossible. But here he was, older, broken, starved, and abandoned. Discarded by whoever had held him last, deemed not wanted, and left tied to a post to wait for death. Cyrus straightened, wiping roughly at his eyes. His hands trembled as he continued examining the animal, looking for other signs of confirmation. There, on the right foreleg, a white sock that extended just to the knee, exactly as he remembered. And there, the small notch in the right ear where a barbed wire fence had caught him as a foal. It was Jasper. Against all reason, against all probability, this was Sarah's donkey, the animal she'd loved, the creature she'd bottle-fed and doted on and treated with such gentle devotion. He'd survived 12 years of whatever hell the outlaws had put him through. 12 years of being used and abused and passed from hand to hand until whoever owned him last decided he wasn't worth the trouble anymore and dumped him in the night. Cyrus sank down into the straw, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. The donkey turned its head, those dark eyes meeting his, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of shared suffering. This animal had witnessed Sarah's death, had been there that night, had been stolen by the same men who destroyed everything Cyrus loved. They were both survivors, both discarded, both carrying scars that went deeper than what showed on the surface. "I'm sorry," Cyrus whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, boy. I should have looked for you. Should have tried." The donkey didn't respond, of course, but it didn't move away either. It stood quiet and patient, as if understanding that sometimes grief needed to be spoken aloud. Cyrus made his decision in that moment. He would save this animal, not just out of kindness to a suffering creature, not even just to honor Sarah's memory, but because Jasper, this broken, rejected donkey, represented the last living connection to the life he'd lost. Saving him meant saving a piece of the past. It meant proving that some things could be reclaimed, some damage undone. It meant that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for second chances. The days that followed took on a rhythm of their own. Cyrus rose earlier than usual, stole time from his sleep to tend to Jasper before his regular duties began. He cleaned the infected sores with careful hands, applied salve he purchased from the town doctor, and spent patient hours working through the matted fur with brush and comb. The work was slow, meditative. Each stroke of the brush, each gentle touch, felt like an act of reclamation. The other ranch hands maintained their mockery, though it grew more scattered as the week progressed. Carson would call out as Cyrus passed, "How's your charity case, Bell?" "Dead yet?" Dutch shook his head whenever he saw Cyrus hauling extra water to the far stall, but said nothing directly. The unspoken message was clear. This was Cyrus's foolishness to manage, and when it inevitably failed, no one would be surprised. But Tommy Price proved different. On the third morning, he appeared at the stall door while Cyrus was measuring out oats, careful not to overfeed a starving stomach. "Mr. Bell," the young man said hesitantly, "I brought some molasses from the cookhouse. Thought it might help the donkey eat better." Cyrus accepted the small jar with a nod of thanks. "That's kind of you, Tommy." "He looks a little better," Tommy observed, stepping into the stall. "His eyes are clearer, a bit. Still got a long road ahead." Tommy lingered, watching as Cyrus mixed the molasses into the oats. "Why'd you do it? Take him in, I mean. The others say it's a waste." Cyrus considered the question. He could offer the simple answer that the animal needed help. But something in Tommy's earnest face invited honesty. "I knew this donkey once. Long time ago. Before he was like this." "You did." "Belonged to my wife. She raised him from a foal." Tommy's eyes widened. "I didn't know you were married." "Was. She died 12 years back." The young man went quiet, the weight of that simple statement settling between them. "Then I'm sorry, Mr. Bell, that must have been hard." "Still is some days." Cyrus set the feed bucket down. Jasper approached it slowly, still cautious, but eating with more confidence than before. "My wife had a gift with animals. Good Gentle, the meanest horse, coax life back into the sickest creature. She would have known exactly what to do here. Seems like you're doing fine to me." Cyrus allowed himself a small smile. "Doing my best to remember what she taught me." Over the following days, Tommy became a quiet ally. He'd stop by the stall when his duties allowed, bringing scraps from the cookhouse or helping Cyrus haul water. The boy asked questions about Sarah, about the homestead, about the life Cyrus had lived before the double bar K. And Cyrus, surprising himself, answered. The words came haltingly at first, rusty from disuse, but they came. On the 8th day, Emma Hartwell arrived for her weekly visit. She found Cyrus in the stall, carefully examining Jasper's hooves, checking for rot or injury. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, before she cleared her throat gently. "I heard you took in a donkey," she said. Cyrus straightened, suddenly self-conscious. Emma wore a practical riding skirt and a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a sensible bun. She carried herself with the quiet authority of a woman who knew her worth and didn't need to announce it. "Yes, ma'am. Hope it's not a problem? Dutch says you're handling it on your own time and resources." "That's right." Emma stepped into the stall, moving with the confidence of someone comfortable around animals. Jasper watched her but didn't shy away. She ran an appraising eye over him, taking in the improving condition. "You've done good work. He was in bad shape when they found him, still is in some ways. But he's fighting. Dutch also mentioned you have some personal connection to the animal." Cyrus hesitated, then nodded. "He belonged to my late wife. Was stolen years ago in a raid. Finding him here after all this time feels like something I can't quite explain." Emma's expression softened. "My mother used to say that sometimes the things we've lost find their way back to us when we need them most." She reached out, stroking Jasper's neck with practiced gentleness. "I think you were meant to find him, Mr. Bell." "Maybe so." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Emma said, "If you need anything for his care, medicine, special feed, let me know. We can work something out." "Appreciate that, ma'am, but I'll manage. I know you will. But the offer stands." She turned to leave, paused at the door. "It's good to see you caring about something again. I've noticed you these past years always keeping to yourself. This is different, better." After she left, Cyrus sat in the straw and allowed himself to truly think about Sarah for the first time in months. Not the painful memories of her death, but the earlier ones. The good ones. Her laugh. The way she hummed while cooking. The patience she showed with every creature that crossed their path. That evening, after his regular duties ended, Cyrus returned to the bunkhouse and pulled his small trunk from beneath the bed. Most of his possessions fit easily. Extra clothes, his father's razor, the tintype photograph. But at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string, was a leather journal. Sarah's journal. He'd packed it away after her death, unable to bear reading her words, and hadn't opened it since. Now, with trembling hands, he unwrapped it and let it fall open. The pages were yellowed, her handwriting familiar and heartbreaking. He flipped through slowly, past entries about garden planning and recipes, past notes about the weather and lists of chores. Then he found what he was looking for. April 17th, 1875. Found a donkey foal today, half-starved and shaking behind the barn. His mother must have been killed. Cy says we don't need another mouth to feed, but how can I turn away from those eyes? I'll call him Jasper after the stone. Grey and steady and precious, May 2nd, 1875. Jasper follows me everywhere now. He's like a large, awkward puppy. Eats from my hand and lets me brush him for hours. There's a white sock on his right foreleg that makes him look like he's wearing a fancy boot. Cy pretends to be annoyed, but I caught him smiling at Jasper yesterday, June 20th, 1875. Had Jasper branded today. SB, my initials, so he'll always know he's mine. Cy says it's silly to brand a donkey, but I want him marked. Want him to carry a piece of me wherever he goes. He's special, this little one. Patient and kind and gentle. Like all the best parts of the world packed into a stubborn, long-eared package. Cyrus closed the journal, his vision blurred. Every detail matched. The white sock, the gentle temperament Sarah had described. Even the brand, her insistence on marking him with her initials, her desire for him to always know he's mine. The next morning, Cyrus entered the stall and spoke clearly for the first time. "Jasper!" The donkey's ears swiveled forward. His head lifted. "Jasper," Cyrus repeated more softly. The donkey took 3 steps toward him, something like recognition flickering in his dark eyes. It had been 12 years. An impossible span of time for an animal to remember a name, a voice, a life before the suffering. But something was there, some echo of memory, or perhaps simply the response to a tone that promised safety. Cyrus reached out, running his hand along Jasper's neck. "Yeah," he whispered. "It's you. It's really you." And I'm going to make sure nothing bad happens to you ever again." For the first time since Sarah's death, Cyrus felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. Not break, not yet, but shift just enough to let in the smallest sliver of light. By the second week, Jasper's recovery had become visible to anyone who cared to look. The sores were healing, pink new skin replacing the infected wounds. His coat, once dull and lifeless, was beginning to show hints of its natural grey sheen where Cyrus had worked through the mats. Most importantly, the donkey's eyes held alertness now, awareness replacing the dull resignation of an animal waiting to die. Cyrus found himself spending more and more time in the stall, even when Jasper didn't strictly need attention. He'd sit in the straw and talk, his voice low and steady, telling stories about Sarah that he'd kept locked away for over a decade, about how she'd sing to the chickens while collecting eggs, how she'd argued with him about the proper way to stack firewood, insisting her method was superior even though they both knew his made more sense, how she'd cried when they'd found an injured bird and couldn't save it, then dried her tears and said, "Well, at least it didn't die alone." Jasper would stand nearby, ears forward, listening with an attention that felt almost human. Sometimes he'd rest his head against Cyrus's shoulder, and Cyrus would stroke his neck and feel something in his chest loosen just a bit more. The memories came easier now, the happy ones, not just the painful end. He remembered Sarah dancing in the cabin on a rare rainy afternoon, pulling him up despite his protests that he had 2 left feet. He remembered the way she'd tease him about his serious nature, calling him "my solemn soldier" and trying to make him laugh. He remembered, and the remembering hurt less than it had before. Tommy had become a steady presence, helping with Jasper's care whenever Dutch wasn't watching too closely. The young man would sneak extra apples from the cookhouse or show up with a curry comb he'd borrowed from the tack room. He listened to Cyrus's stories with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly paying attention. "She sounds like she was a wonderful person," Tommy said one evening, as they worked together to clean out the stall. "She was. Better than I deserved. I bet she'd be proud of what you're doing here." "Saving Jasper?" Cyrus paused, leaning on his pitchfork. "I'd like to think so, though she'd probably scold me for taking so long to start." Dutch's patience finally ran out on a Tuesday afternoon. He found Cyrus in the stall during what should have been his break time and planted himself in the doorway, arms crossed. "Belle, we need to talk." Cyrus straightened, meeting the foreman's hard stare. "All right. This animal is taking too much of your attention. You're exhausted, I can see it. You're going to make a mistake, hurt yourself or someone else because you're too tired to think straight. I'm managing fine. Are you?" Dutch stepped into the stall. "Because from where I stand, you're running yourself into the ground for a donkey that ain't even yours." "Not really. That animal belongs to whoever abandoned it." "No," Cyrus said quietly but firmly. "He's mine. He always was, even when he was stolen from me. And I won't abandon him the way others did." Dutch studied him for a long moment. "You really won't back down on this, will you?" "No, sir, I won't." The foreman sighed, scratching his beard. "Then at least take Sunday off. Proper rest. I'll assign your duties to Carson for the day. But if I see your work suffering, Belle, we're going to have a more serious conversation." "Understood?" "Understood. And thank you." Dutch grunted and left, shaking his head. Cyrus allowed himself a small smile. He'd stood his ground, something he hadn't done in years, and it felt good. Emma's visits became more frequent. She'd stop by the stall when she came to check the ranch's accounts, always with some practical reason, bringing high-quality hay or a bottle of liniment or new brushes for Jasper's coat. But she'd linger after delivering whatever she'd brought, talking with Cyrus about small things, the weather, the ranch's operations, eventually more personal topics. On one such visit, she sat on an overturned bucket while Cyrus worked and said, "I lost my mother 5 years ago. Cancer. It was slow and painful, and there was nothing any of us could do but watch." Cyrus paused in his brushing. "I'm sorry. She was my best friend. After she passed, I didn't know who I was anymore. Felt like I'd lost my direction." Emma watched Jasper, her expression thoughtful. My father wanted me to go back east, find a husband, live a normal life. But I couldn't leave. This ranch, this land, it's where I still feel close to her. Grief doesn't follow anyone else's timetable, Cyrus said. No, it doesn't. She looked at him directly. But watching you with Jasper, I see something I recognized. You're finding your way back. Slowly but surely. Maybe. Some days it feels like I'm just going through the motions. That's how healing starts sometimes. The motions become real again before you even notice it's happening. Their conversation was interrupted by Jasper, who ambled over and nuzzled Emma's hand, seeking attention. She laughed, a warm, genuine sound, and obliged him with scratches behind his good ear. That evening, alone in the bunkhouse while the other men played cards and swapped stories, Cyrus retrieved one more item from his trunk. A small wooden figurine, no bigger than his palm, carved in the rough shape of a donkey. Sarah had made it during their second winter together, whittling at a piece of scrap wood while snow fell outside their cabin. She'd presented it to him with a flourish, saying, "Now you can have a reminder of my ridiculous devotion to four-legged creatures wherever you go." He'd carried it with him ever since, wrapped carefully and tucked away. Now he walked through the darkness to Jasper's stall and placed the figurine on a small shelf by the door. The wood had darkened with age, Sarah's finger marks still visible in the grain. "This was hers," he told Jasper. "She made it for me, but I think she'd want you to have it here. A piece of her watching over you." Jasper stood quiet, his breathing steady and calm. He was gaining weight now, his frame filling out, his movements less painful. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was undeniable. This animal was going to survive. The other ranch hands had noticed the change in both Jasper and Cyrus. Carson still made the occasional joke, but the edge had dulled. Some of the men had even stopped by the stall to see the donkey, offering gruff compliments on Cyrus's work. Word had spread to town, and when Cyrus went in for supplies, people asked about that donkey Bell rescued, the town doctor, a weathered man named Fitzgerald who treated humans and animals with equal skill, stopped by one afternoon. He examined Jasper thoroughly, checking teeth, joints, listening to his heart and lungs. "You've done remarkable work, Bell," he said finally. "This animal was within days of death when you found him. Now, he'll live years yet if you keep caring for him properly." That night, lying in his bunk and listening to the familiar sounds of the bunkhouse settling, Cyrus realized something that shook him. He felt alive, not just going through the motions of existence, but genuinely present in his own life. The constant ache in his chest hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more bearable, something that coexisted with moments of actual peace, maybe even flickers of contentment. Sarah would have been pleased, he thought. She'd always believed that caring for others, human or animal, was the path back from any darkness. He doubted that wisdom after losing her, convinced that nothing could ease such profound loss. But here, in a dusty stall with a rescued donkey, he was beginning to understand what she'd meant. Saving Jasper was saving himself, one patient day at a time. 3 weeks into October, Jasper could walk the length of the corral without limping. It was a small victory, but watching the donkey move, with something approaching normalcy, filled Cyrus with a satisfaction he'd forgotten existed. The healing wasn't just physical. Jasper responded to voice commands now, came when called, and had developed the endearing habit of resting his head on Cyrus's shoulder whenever the old ranch hand sat down in the stall. The days had taken on a pleasant rhythm. Cyrus would complete his regular duties with renewed energy, then spend his evenings with Jasper, teaching him to respond to simple commands, walking him in slow circles around the empty corral, rebuilding the trust that had been shattered by years of rough treatment. The work was meditative, purposeful, and for the first time in over a decade, Cyrus could see a future that extended beyond simply surviving until tomorrow. Emma's visits had become the highlight of his week. She'd appear with treats, carrots, apples, sometimes sugar cubes wrapped in brown paper, and stay to talk. Their conversations had deepened beyond polite pleasantries. She told him about her struggles managing the ranch, about the weight of living up to her father's expectations, about her own quiet loneliness in a world that expected women to be wives and mothers above all else. "I'm 35, she said one afternoon, feeding Jasper pieces of apple while Cyrus mended a worn halter. "The town gossips have declared me a spinster, as if there's something wrong with choosing my own path." "Nothing wrong with it," Cyrus replied. "Takes courage to live by your own lights. You understand that, don't you? You've been doing it for years. Wouldn't call it courage. More like stubbornness," she smiled. "Maybe that's the same thing." Cyrus found himself sharing more about Sarah, not just the good memories, but the harder truths. How he'd failed to protect her. How the guilt had eaten at him for years. How he'd convinced himself he deserved the emptiness that followed. "You can't blame yourself for violence done by evil men," Emma said firmly. "That burden belongs to them alone. Knowing something in your head and believing it in your heart are different things. I understand that better than you might think." One Thursday afternoon, Tommy burst into the stall, his face flushed with excitement and concern. In his hands he clutched a worn piece of paper, edges torn and stained. "Mr. Bell, you need to see this." Cyrus took the paper, and his blood went cold. It was a wanted poster, the kind that hung in the marshal's office and on posts throughout the territory. The face staring back at him was etched into his memory despite the passage of 12 years. "Jack Mercer, wanted for murder, robbery, cattle rustling. $5,000 reward. Believed dead," the bottom of the poster read, "but reports suggest possible sighting near Prescott." "Where did you get this?" Cyrus's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Town marshal's office. I was delivering a message for Dutch and saw it on the board. I remembered you mentioning a raid, and the name. I thought you should know." Cyrus's hands trembled. The face on the poster was older than he remembered, but the eyes were the same, cold, calculating, the face of the man who'd struck Sarah, who'd ordered the cabin burned, who'd stolen everything Cyrus had loved and left him with nothing but ashes and grief. "Mr. Bell, are you all right?" "I'm fine." The lie tasted bitter. "Thank you for bringing this. I'll handle it." After Tommy left, Cyrus sank onto the overturned bucket, the poster clutched in his fist. His mind flooded with memories he'd worked so hard to bury. Sarah falling, the crack of her head against the table, the smell of smoke, his own helpless rage as they beat him. And through it all, that face, Mercer's face, watching with cold amusement, Jasper sensed something wrong. The donkey moved close, pressing his warm body against Cyrus's side, breathing soft and steady. Cyrus reached up, gripping Jasper's mane, anchoring himself in the present. For 12 years, he'd believed Mercer dead. The marshal had told him so, shot in Mexico. Body never recovered, but witnesses confirmed. Cyrus had accepted it, felt a grim satisfaction that at least some justice had been served. But if Mercer was alive, if he'd been living free all this time while Cyrus drowned in grief, "Bell, what's going on?" Dutch stood in the doorway, his expression stern. "Tommy came running from here looking worried. Said you seemed upset." "It's nothing. Don't insult my intelligence. What's in your hand?" Cyrus considered refusing to answer, but Dutch had been fair to him despite everything. He deserved honesty. Reluctantly, he handed over the poster. Dutch studied it, his jaw tightening. "This the man from the raid Tommy mentioned?" "Yes. And you're thinking about going after him." "I didn't say that. Don't have to. I can see it in your face." Dutch handed the poster back. "Listen to me, Bell. You've built something good here. That donkey, the respect you've earned, the way you've started living again. Don't throw it away for revenge. Men like Mercer get what's coming eventually. Don't let him take anything more from you." After Dutch left, Cyrus sat in the stall as afternoon faded to evening. His mind churned between contradictory impulses. Part of him wanted to saddle a horse and ride for Prescott to find Mercer and make him answer for what he'd done. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger these past weeks, remembered Sarah's voice, her belief in forgiveness, her insistence that revenge poisoned the one who sought it more than its target. Emma found him there in the gathering darkness, Jasper standing guard beside him. "Tommy told me," she said simply, settling onto the floor beside him. "I'm sorry." Cyrus was silent for a long moment. Then, without quite meaning to, he told her everything. About the raid in full detail, about watching Sarah die, about the 12 years of believing Mercer had paid for his crimes, only to discover the man might still be alive and free. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "Part of me wants justice, wants him to pay. That's natural. Anyone would feel that way. But Sarah would tell me to let it go. To forgive, would she?" Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "Or would she tell you that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting? That you can let go of revenge while still wanting justice?" Cyrus looked at her, seeing the understanding in her eyes. "If the marshal is investigating, let him do his job," Emma continued. "You have something more important here. You have Jasper, who needs you. You have a life that's finally starting to heal. Don't let Mercer take that away, too. She was right." Cyrus knew she was right. But the knowledge didn't ease the burning anger in his chest. The raw need to see the man who destroyed everything answer for his crimes. The ultimatum came on a grey morning, when the wind carried the promise of early winter. Mr. Hartwell, himself, Emma's father and the ranch owner, arrived in a buggy, his expression grave. He found Cyrus mucking out Jasper's stall and got straight to business. "Belle, we need to discuss this animal situation." Cyrus straightened, pitchfork in hand. "Yes, sir. The ranch is facing some financial difficulties. Drought's been hard on the grazing land, and cattle prices have dropped. I need every resource accounted for." He gestured at Jasper. "That donkey is consuming feed and space. If he's going to stay, he needs to earn his keep. Otherwise, I'll need you to find him another home." The words hit Cyrus like a physical blow. Find another home. As if Jasper was just another piece of property to be moved around at convenience. As if the past weeks of careful healing, of rebuilding trust and hope, meant nothing. "I understand, sir. Give me 2 weeks. I'll figure something out." After Hartwell left, Cyrus sat in the straw, his mind racing. He couldn't let Jasper go. Not now, not after everything. But he also couldn't ask the ranch to keep supporting an animal that served no practical purpose. The frontier was harsh about such things. Sentiment didn't fill bellies or pay debts. That evening, alone in the bunkhouse, Cyrus pulled the chain from around his neck. Sarah's wedding ring hung there, the simple gold band warm from resting against his skin. He'd worn it every day since her death, the physical weight a reminder of vows made and a life lost. It was all he had left of their marriage. Besides the tintype and her journal, the town jeweler would give him good money for it. Enough to buy feed for months, maybe even pay the ranch for Jasper's boarding. It made practical sense. Sarah would understand, wouldn't she? She'd always been practical beneath her gentle nature, but the thought of removing the ring permanently, of watching a stranger melt it down or sell it to someone else, felt like losing her all over again. Emma found him the next day, the ring in his palm, staring at it as if it might hold answers. Cyrus? She'd started using his first name recently, and he found he didn't mind. "What are you thinking?" "Thinking I might need to sell this. Buy feed for Jasper, pay your father for his keep." Emma's eyes widened. "No, you can't. Don't see another option. I'll help. I have money saved." "No!" Cyrus closed his fist around the ring. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't take charity. Especially not from you. It wouldn't be charity. It would be—" She paused, searching for words. "It would be friends helping each other." "Emma, I can't ask that of you." They stood in tense silence until Tommy appeared, slightly out of breath. "Mr. Bell, I've been thinking. What if we trained Jasper to work? Nothing heavy, but he could carry supplies, pull a light cart, prove he's useful." Cyrus considered this. Jasper was healthier now, strong enough for light labor. It wouldn't be the same as a full working animal, but it might be enough to satisfy Hartwell's requirement. "It's worth trying," he said slowly. Over the next week, Cyrus worked with Jasper on simple tasks. The donkey proved surprisingly willing, as if understanding what was at stake. They started with carrying empty saddlebags, then gradually added weight. Jasper would walk beside Cyrus, steady and patient, following commands with an eagerness that broke and mended something in Cyrus's heart at the same time. Tommy helped fashion a simple cart from spare lumber. It was rough but functional. They hitched Jasper to it carefully, watching for any sign of distress or pain. The donkey pulled without complaint, his gait steady despite old injuries. Some of the ranch hands gathered to watch, including Carson and a few others who'd been particularly vocal in their mockery. But now they watched with something approaching respect. "I'll be damned," Carson muttered. The old coot actually made something useful out of that walking skeleton. Dutch observed from a distance, his expression unreadable. He approached Cyrus later that evening. "You're still thinking about Mercer, aren't you?" Cyrus didn't bother denying it. "Can't seem to stop. That kind of thinking will eat you alive." "I've seen it before." Dutch's voice was unusually gentle. "Men who chase revenge end up hollow, even when they get it. Especially when they get it. So I'm supposed to just forget? Let him walk free? I'm saying you need to choose what matters more. The life you're building, or the death you're contemplating." Emma's words echoed similar themes when she visited later. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said, watching Jasper nose through the straw for stray pieces of grain. "It means choosing not to let the past poison your future." "How do you forgive something like murder?" "I don't know if you can, fully, but you can decide that the person who did it won't control your life anymore. That's a kind of freedom too." Cyrus wanted to believe her, wanted to embrace the peace she described. But at night, when sleep eluded him, he saw Mercer's face, heard Sarah's cry, smelled the smoke, and the anger felt righteous and justified and impossible to release. On Saturday, a traveling merchant stopped at the ranch to sell goods. Cyrus was walking Jasper near the main house when the man's eyes fixed on the donkey. "That's a fine animal," the merchant said. "Looks like one I saw a few years back down near the Mexican border. Was part of a pack train run by some rough characters. Outlaws, I suspect. They had a whole string of stolen livestock." Cyrus's blood went cold. "You're sure it was the same donkey?" "I can't be certain, but the markings look similar. Had that same broken ear, I think. Felt sorry for the beast. They worked him hard, didn't treat him well." After the merchant left, Cyrus stood in Jasper's stall, processing this new information. Jasper had been with the outlaws, not just stolen by them on that terrible night, but kept by them for years afterward. This donkey had witnessed who knew what crimes, had been forced to carry stolen goods, had seen violence and cruelty as a daily reality. The knowledge should have filled Cyrus with rage. Instead, he felt a profound sadness. Jasper wasn't just a reminder of what had been taken from him. He was a fellow survivor of the same evil men. They'd both been broken by Mercer's gang, both discarded when they were no longer useful. Cyrus reached up, touching the chain around his neck where Sarah's ring rested. He'd keep it, he decided. Find another way to pay for Jasper's upkeep. The ring was part of Sarah, and so was his commitment to this animal. He couldn't sacrifice one for the other. He'd have to find a way to honor both. "We're going to be all right," he told Jasper softly. "Both of us. We're going to survive this and come out better on the other side." He only wished he felt as certain as he tried to sound. Sunday morning arrived cold and clear, frost painting the windows of the bunkhouse in delicate patterns. Cyrus had the day off, as Dutch had promised, and he spent it entirely with Jasper. The donkey had become more than a project now. He was companion, confidant, and connection to a past that felt less painful with each passing day. Cyrus worked methodically, grooming Jasper with care and attention. The donkey's coat had improved dramatically, but there were still areas of matted fur that needed patient work. He'd been putting off dealing with the thick mats along Jasper's neck, knowing they'd be painful to work through. But today seemed like the right time. He started at the base of the mane, working his fingers gently through the tangled hair. Jasper stood patient and still, occasionally turning his head to nudge Cyrus as if to reassure him. The trust between them had grown profound. This animal, who had every reason to fear human touch, now actively sought it out. As Cyrus worked higher along the neck, just beneath where the mane hung thick and heavy, his fingers encountered something that made him pause, a pattern in the skin. Not the brand he'd already found, Sarah's SB on the flank, but something else. Something hidden beneath layers of matted hair that had grown wild and unkempt. He fetched scissors and worked carefully, cutting away the worst of the mats, revealing the skin beneath. What emerged made his breath catch in his throat, a rope brand, not a hot iron brand like Sarah's neat initials, but the kind of crude mark that came from burning rope pressed against hide. It formed a distinctive pattern, a circle with lines radiating outward. Cyrus had seen that symbol before years ago on wanted posters and in reports from the territorial marshal. It was the mark of the Mercer gang. Cyrus stepped back, his heart pounding. His mind raced through the implications, pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. Jasper hadn't just been stolen by the outlaws that night. He'd been marked by them, claimed as their property. That meant, oh God, Cyrus whispered, Jasper had been with them. For years, however long it took for that rope brand to heal and for his mane to grow long enough to hide it. He'd been part of their operation, carrying stolen goods, witnessing their crimes. This gentle creature had been forced to serve the very men who'd murdered Sarah. The realization hit Cyrus like a physical blow. He sank to his knees in the straw, his vision blurring. Jasper had been there that night. He'd witnessed Sarah's death, had been dragged away from the only home and family he'd known, forced into a life of hard labor and abuse by the same men who'd destroyed everything. And when he'd finally outlived his usefulness, too old, too scarred, too broken down by years of rough treatment, they'd discarded him, tied him to a post with a note that said, "Not wanted," and left him to die. The cruelty of it overwhelmed Cyrus. His shoulders shook with sobs he'd been holding back for 12 years. All the grief, all the rage, all the helpless frustration came pouring out in great wrenching gasps. Jasper moved closer, pressing his head against Cyrus's chest, and somehow that made it both worse and better. "I'm sorry," Cyrus choked out, his arms around the donkey's neck. "I'm so sorry you went through that. So sorry I couldn't protect you." Couldn't protect her. He didn't know how long he stayed there, crying into Jasper's mane, while the donkey stood patient and steady. When Emma's voice came from the doorway, soft and concerned, Cyrus couldn't even look up. "Cyrus, what's happened?" He tried to speak, couldn't find words, and simply pointed at the rope brand. Emma came closer, examined it, and her expression shifted to understanding. The outlaw gang. He was with them, Cyrus managed. All those years. He witnessed Sarah's death, Emma. He was there. And then they took him and used him and finally threw him away like garbage. Emma sank down beside him, her hand on his shoulder. But he survived. Just like you did. They broke him. They tried to. But look at him now. She gestured at Jasper, who watched them both with those dark, knowing eyes. He's healing. Because of you. Because you saw past the brokenness to the life still inside him. Cyrus wiped his face with shaking hands. His mind conjured images he could barely stand. Jasper in the years after that night, carrying stolen goods through harsh territory, beaten when he moved too slowly, neglected and abused. Forced to work for the men who'd killed his beloved Sarah, the psychological torture of it. If animals could understand such things, seemed unbearable. How many times did they load him down with things they'd stolen? Cyrus said bitterly. How many raids did he witness? How many people suffered because of what he was forced to help them do? None of that was his choice. He's as much a victim as anyone, I know. I know that. But Emma, his voice broke again. He's carried this burden all these years. No wonder they abandoned him. He probably reminded them of their crimes. Of the night they killed Sarah. They couldn't stand having him around anymore. The not-wanted note suddenly made terrible, perfect sense. Jasper wasn't just unwanted because he was old or sick or used up. He was unwanted because he was a living reminder of murder. Of the innocent woman whose death had allowed them to steal him in the first place. Tommy appeared at some point, drawn by the commotion. He stood in the doorway, uncertain, until Emma waved him in. "Tell him," she said quietly to the young man. Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't want to add to your troubles, Mr. Bell, but I heard more news in town yesterday. Jack Mercer, he's definitely in the territory." Marshall confirmed it. "There's a posse forming to track him down. They leave in 3 days." The room went very still. This was the moment. The choice Cyrus had been circling for weeks. He could join that posse. could ride out with righteous fury and help hunt down the man who'd destroyed his life. The man who'd stolen this innocent animal and forced him into years of suffering. Jasper nuzzled his shoulder, patient and forgiving. "You have every right to go," Emma said softly. No one would blame you, but even as she spoke, Cyrus felt something shift inside him. He looked at Jasper, really looked at him, and saw not just a reminder of loss, but proof of survival. This donkey had endured unspeakable things and somehow retained his gentle nature. Hadn't become vicious or broken beyond repair. He'd suffered and yet still chose to trust, to connect, to live. If Jasper could do that, what excuse did Cyrus have for clinging to revenge? "No," Cyrus said, the word feeling both heavy and freeing. "I'm not going," Tommy's eyes widened. "But Mr. Bell, that donkey chose to survive," Emma said, echoing words she'd spoken before. "So can you." "She's right." Cyrus stood, his legs unsteady but holding. "Mercer took 12 years from me. Took my wife, my home, my hope. He took 12 years from Jasper too, made him live a nightmare. But I'll be damned if I let him take one more day." He looked at Emma, then Tommy, his voice growing stronger. "That man doesn't deserve any more of my life, any more of my energy. I've got something more important right here, something that needs me, something I can actually help." "The marshal will get him," Tommy said. "Justice will be served. Maybe, maybe not. But either way, it's not my burden anymore." Cyrus placed his hand on Jasper's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath his palm. "This animal and I, we're both survivors of the same evil. But we don't have to let that evil define us. We can choose something different, something better." Emma smiled, tears bright in her eyes. "Sarah would be proud of you." From the doorway, Dutch's gruff voice startled them all. "Didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I heard most of that." He stepped into the stall, his expression softer than Cyrus had ever seen it. "You're making the right choice, Belle. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." Dutch looked at Jasper with new respect. "That donkey's been through hell and back." "So have you." "Maybe it's time you both got some peace." Cyrus nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. He'd made his choice, not the one driven by rage or pain, but the one guided by the lessons Sarah had tried to teach him, the one that honored both her memory and the life he still had left to live. Let the posse hunt Mercer. Let justice take its course. Cyrus had more important work, healing, protecting, and learning to live again. The days following Cyrus's discovery of the rope brand moved with a strange, deliberate pace. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, each hour heavy with decision, each moment pregnant with the weight of choice. Cyrus found himself standing at a crossroads he'd never expected to reach again, the intersection of past and future, grief and hope, vengeance and peace. He spent those evenings in Jasper's stall, long after the other ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse. The lantern light cast warm shadows across the worn wooden walls, and the donkey's breathing provided a steady, reassuring rhythm that anchored him to the present moment. On the third night after his realization, Cyrus pulled out a sheet of paper he'd purchased from the general store, along with a stub of pencil that felt awkward in his calloused hands. He'd never been much for writing. Sarah had been the one with the graceful script, filling her journals with observations about the world around them, recording her dreams and hopes in careful, beautiful letters. But tonight, Cyrus needed to find words for everything churning inside him, words he'd never spoken aloud, feelings he'd buried for 12 long years. The letter began simply, "Dear Sarah." His hand trembled as he formed the words, each sentence a small act of courage. He wrote about the day he found Jasper, about the mockery and his stubborn decision to save the creature anyway. He wrote about discovering her brand, the SB that connected this animal to their shared past. He described the rope brand that revealed Jasper's years with the outlaws, the men who destroyed their life together. "I spent so long being angry," he wrote, the pencil scratching across the rough paper. "I let that anger hollow me out until there wasn't much left of the man you married. I stopped caring about tomorrow because yesterday hurt too much to remember." Jasper shifted in his stall, moving closer to where Cyrus sat on an overturned bucket. The donkey's warm breath ruffled the paper's edge. "But this old donkey," Cyrus continued, "he survived what I survived. He carried the weight of other men's cruelty and came out the other side. When I look at him, I see what's possible. I see that maybe surviving isn't the same as giving up. Maybe it's the bravest thing we can do." The words came faster now, filling the page with his cramped handwriting. He wrote about Emma's kindness, about Tommy's eager friendship, about the way the community had slowly shifted in its judgment of him. He wrote about the choice before him, to pursue the men who'd taken Sarah from him, or to honor her memory by choosing the path she would have wanted. "You always said kindness was the hardest work," he wrote. "You were right about that, like you were right about most things. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, does it? It means choosing not to let the past poison whatever future we might have left." When the letter was finished, 3 pages of his rough thoughts and careful confessions. Cyrus folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, right next to the tin-type photograph he always carried. Then, with Jasper standing quietly beside him, he read the entire letter aloud. His voice broke more than once. Tears tracked through the dust on his weathered face, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. Jasper stood patient and steady, occasionally nuzzling Cyrus's shoulder with a gentleness that spoke of deep understanding, the kind that exists between creatures who've both known loss and found their way through it. From the shadows near the stable door, Emma Hartwell watched this moment of raw vulnerability. She'd come to bring fresh water for Jasper's trough and found herself frozen by the intimacy of what she witnessed. Cyrus Bell, the man the ranch hands called soft and foolish, was perhaps the strongest person she'd ever known. She backed away quietly, leaving him to his private conversation with memory and hope. The next morning brought unexpected news. The ranch owner, Robert Hartwell, made his way to Jasper's stall where Cyrus was measuring out feed with his usual careful attention. The older man, normally gruff and focused solely on profit margins, stood watching for a long moment before speaking. "Bell," he said finally, "I've been watching what you've done with that animal. How you've brought him back from the edge." Cyrus straightened, waiting for the criticism he'd grown accustomed to expecting. "My daughter tells me you've got a way with creatures others have given up on," Hartwell continued. "Says you see something in them worth saving." He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with sentiment, but pushing forward anyway. "Ranch could use that kind of dedication. Consider the matter of keeping the donkey settled. You've earned it." Before Cyrus could respond, Hartwell was already walking away, shoulders stiff with the awkwardness of praise. But the message had been delivered. Jasper could stay. The threat that had hung over them for weeks had lifted. Tommy found Cyrus an hour later, grinning with the irrepressible energy of youth. "Mr. Bell, did you hear? The boss said Jasper can stay permanent." "I heard," Cyrus said, allowing himself a small smile. "That ain't all," Tommy said, his excitement bubbling over. "I've been listening, paying attention like you taught me. And Mr. Bell," his voice dropped to a more serious register, "I want to be like you when I grow up. Want to be the kind of man who does the right thing even when folks laugh at him for it." The words hit Cyrus harder than he'd expected. He looked at this young man, barely 17, and saw reflected back a belief in goodness that he'd thought the world had beaten out of him long ago. "That's about the finest thing anyone said to me in more years than I can count," Cyrus said quietly. "You keep that heart of yours, Tommy. Don't let the hard times make you hard." The moment was interrupted by Dutch Calloway's arrival. The foreman had been keeping his distance since overhearing the conversation about Jack Mercer, but now he approached with obvious purpose, his expression grave. "Bell, we need to talk," Dutch said. "Private-like." They walked to the far end of the stable, out of Tommy's earshot. Dutch pulled off his hat, turning it in his hands, a nervous gesture Cyrus had rarely seen from the usually confident man. "I heard things in town yesterday," Dutch said. "The Mercer gang's been spotted 2 towns over, moving this direction. Word is they're looking for something they lost." Cyrus's jaw tightened. "Let them look. Don't go doing nothing foolish," Dutch said. "Don't go looking for trouble when it ain't found you yet." "I'm not looking for anything but peace," Cyrus said, and he meant it. "Those days are behind me," Dutch studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've changed, Belle. I didn't see it at first, too busy thinking you were just soft. But there's a difference between soft and kind, ain't there? Took me too long to learn it. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marshal Tom Brennan, a weathered man in his 50s who carried the law with a quiet competence that inspired respect rather than fear. He dismounted and walked directly to where Cyrus and Dutch stood. Cyrus, the marshal said, heard some things that concern me. The Mercer gangs moving through the territory, and given your history with them, I wanted to ask if you'd like some protection. Could station a deputy here at the ranch, just as a precaution. Cyrus shook his head. Appreciate it, Marshal, but no. I'm not looking to provoke anything, and I won't hide from shadows either. If trouble comes, we'll handle it then. You sure about that? Brennan asked. These aren't forgiving men, I'm certain, Cyrus said. I've spent 12 years running from ghosts. I'm done with that. But I won't go chasing them either. The marshal accepted this with a thoughtful nod, then left with a promise to keep his ear to the ground and respond quickly if needed. That evening, Emma found Cyrus brushing Jasper's coat, the methodical strokes a meditation he performed each night. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from beneath it. Thought you might be hungry, she said, setting the basket on a hay bale. You've been spending so much time out here, I worry you forget to eat. That's kind of you, Cyrus said, not pausing in his work. Emma watched him for a moment, gathering her courage. Cyrus, I need to say something, and I'd appreciate if you'd let me finish before you respond. He stopped brushing, giving her his full attention. These past weeks, watching you with Jasper, seeing the way you've stood firm despite everything, it's shown me what real strength looks like, Emma said. Her cheeks colored slightly, but her voice remained steady. I care about you, not because I pity you or want to fix you, but because you're a good man who's found his way back to living. And I wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's someone here who sees you and values what she sees. Cyrus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Emma, You don't have to say anything now, she interrupted gently. I know you're not ready for that kind of care, and I respect it. I just wanted you to know the possibility exists whenever you might be ready to consider it. For now, I'm content to be your friend. I'm grateful for your friendship, Cyrus said carefully. More grateful than I know how to say. You've been a light in a dark time. But you're right, I'm not ready for more than that. Maybe someday. For now, just knowing you're here, that you believe in what I'm trying to do, it means more than you know. Emma smiled, relieved and a little sad, but accepting. Then that's what we'll be, friends. The following days brought an unexpected development. Children from town began arriving at the ranch, asking permission to see the rescued donkey. Parents accompanied them, curiosity overcoming their initial judgment of Cyrus's foolish kindness. Jasper, now healthy and calm, greeted each visitor with patient grace, allowing small hands to pat his nose and stroke his neck. Cyrus found himself telling the story again and again, simplified for young ears, but honest in its core message. Sometimes creatures get treated poorly through no fault of their own, he'd say. Sometimes folks decide something isn't worth caring about just because it's old or hurt or different. But every life has value, and sometimes all something needs is for someone to believe in it enough to help. The children listened with wide eyes, and their parents nodded thoughtfully. Slowly, the narrative around Cyrus Bell began to shift in Hollow Creek. He was no longer the foolish ranch hand wasting resources on a worthless animal. He'd become something else, a man of principle, someone who'd stood by his convictions when it would have been easier to yield. On a cool evening, 6 weeks after finding Jasper, Cyrus was finishing up his chores when a stranger arrived at the ranch. The man rode a tired horse and wore dust-covered clothes that spoke of hard travel. He dismounted near the corral and approached Cyrus with a casual confidence that immediately set alarm bells ringing. "Evening, friend," the stranger said. "I'm looking for information about a donkey. Grey coat, white muzzle, about 15 hands high. Heard there might be one matching that description here." Cyrus's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "What's your interest in such an animal?" "Looking for lost property," the stranger said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Owner's real interested in getting his possession back. Sentimental value, you understand." "Don't know anything about lost property," Cyrus said evenly. "Got a donkey here that was abandoned. Found him with a note saying he wasn't wanted. Made him mine legally through the marshal's office." The stranger's smile faded. "That so? Well, my employer might see it differently. Might be he'd like to discuss the matter personally. He's welcome to try," Cyrus said. "Through proper legal channels." The stranger tipped his hat mockingly. "I'll pass along your message. But friend, you might want to reconsider your position. Some discussions are better handled cooperative-like." He rode off as the sun set behind the mountains, leaving Cyrus standing in the gathering darkness, with the certain knowledge that the storm he'd been dreading was finally about to break. The climax was coming, inevitable as winter, and Cyrus Bell stood ready to face it, not with the rage and vengeance he'd carried for 12 years, but with the quiet strength he'd rediscovered in the eyes of a rejected donkey who'd taught him that survival itself was an act of courage. The stranger returned 2 days later, and this time he brought company. 3 men rode into the Double Bar K ranch just after dawn, when the morning light painted everything in shades of gold and promise that belied the danger they carried with them. Cyrus was already awake, had been for hours, some instinct telling him that today would bring the confrontation he'd been bracing for. He stood in the stable doorway, one hand resting on the frame, the other tucked into his pocket where Sarah's small Bible nestled against his palm. She'd carried it every day of their marriage, filled the margins with her careful notes about grace and forgiveness, underlined passages about mercy and second chances. He'd found himself reading it these past weeks, tracing his fingers over her handwriting, trying to understand the faith that had made her so fearlessly kind. The 3 riders dismounted with the easy confidence of men accustomed to getting what they wanted. The one from before, lean and cold-eyed, flanked by 2 others who had the look of hired muscle about them. They wore their guns low and ready, though none made a move to draw. "Not yet. Told you I'd be back," the lead man said. "Brought some friends to help discuss matters." Cyrus didn't move from his position. Nothing to discuss. "Donkey was abandoned. He's mine now, legal and proper." "See, that's where you're wrong," the man said. "Animal belongs to Jack Mercer. He's real particular about getting back what's his." The name hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Dutch Calloway, who'd been mucking stalls nearby, froze at the sound of it. Within moments, other ranch hands began appearing from the bunkhouse, from the barn, from their various morning tasks. They formed a loose semicircle behind Cyrus, none of them armed, but all of them present. Tommy pushed his way to the front, young and eager, and ready to stand by the man he'd come to admire. Emma had been in the main house when she saw the riders arrive. She sent one of the stable boys running for the marshal before making her way quickly to the gathering crowd. She positioned herself where Cyrus could see her, a steady presence in his peripheral vision. "Jack Mercer's got no claim here," Cyrus said, his voice carrying clearly across the morning air. "He stole that donkey 12 years ago during a raid. Stole him along with everything else worth taking. The creature was abandoned with a note saying he wasn't wanted. That makes him mine." The lead outlaw's eyes narrowed. "You seem to know an awful lot about Mr. Mercer's business." "I know he murdered my wife during that raid," Cyrus said flatly. "Burned our homestead, killed Sarah Bell while she tried to defend her home. That donkey belonged to her. Had her brand on him, SB for Sarah Bell, found it beneath the dirt and neglect you people left him in." This revelation caused a stir among both groups. The outlaws exchanged glances, calculating this new information. The ranch hands pressed closer, protective instincts rising. "That's a sad story," the lead man said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. "But it don't change facts. Mr. Mercer's got his own claim. That donkey wasn't stolen from your wife. It was stolen from his daughter first. Your Sarah took it from a little girl who'd already lost everything." Cyrus felt the ground shift beneath him. "That's a lie." "Ain't no lie," the outlaw continued. "Mercer's daughter. She was 8 years old when Apache raiders came through their settlement. Killed everyone but her and that donkey she loved. Your wife found them wandering the desert, took the child to an orphanage, but kept the animal for herself. The girl died in that orphanage a year later, crying for the only thing she had left of her family. When Mercer finally tracked her down, all he found was a grave, and rumors about a woman who'd taken in a grey donkey with a white muzzle. The story hit Cyrus like a physical blow. He wanted to deny it, wanted to call it the manipulation it surely was, but something in the telling rang with uncomfortable possibility. Sarah had found Jasper as a foal, brought him home one day with tears in her eyes and a story about a tragic situation. She'd never given him all the details. Just said the animal needed saving. Even if that's true, Cyrus said, his voice rougher now, it doesn't give Mercer the right to murder innocent people. Never said it did, the outlaw replied. But he's dying now. Got maybe a month if he's lucky. That donkey's all he's got left of his daughter. Wants to spend his last days with the creature she loved. That really so unreasonable? Tommy spoke up, his young voice fierce with conviction. He's a murderer. He doesn't deserve anything. Maybe not, the lead man agreed. But he's asking anyway. The sound of approaching horses cut through the tension. Marshal Brennan arrived with 2 deputies, all 3 men armed and alert. They positioned themselves strategically, hands near their weapons, but not drawing them. Gentlemen, Brennan said calmly, I'm going to need you to state your business here. We're here for property that belongs to Jack Mercer, the lead outlaw said. Just trying to conduct business peaceable-like. You're wanted men, Brennan replied. All 3 of you. Got warrants dating back years. You're under arrest. The outlaws' hands moved toward their guns, but they were outnumbered and outpositioned. The deputies had their rifles trained steady, and even the unarmed ranch hands had picked up tools that could serve as weapons if needed. The mathematics of violence worked against them. You can come quiet or you can come hard, Brennan said. But you're coming either way. Cyrus reached into his pocket, pulling out Sarah's Bible. He held it for a moment, thinking about her notes on forgiveness, her underlined passages about grace. Then he looked at the lead outlaw, at the man who'd ridden all this way on behalf of a dying murderer who'd destroyed Cyrus's life, but who'd also, apparently, lost everything himself, Marshal, Cyrus said quietly. I don't want to press charges. I don't want to testify against these men. Everyone turned to stare at him, Emma with concern, Tommy with confusion, Dutch with something like respect. Cyrus, Brennan began, these men are wanted for— I know what they're wanted for, Cyrus interrupted. But I've carried enough hate for one lifetime. You do what the law requires, but leave me out of it. I've got everything I need right here. The lead outlaw looked at Cyrus with something that might have been surprise or might have been respect. You really mean that? Every word, Cyrus said. But the donkey stays with me. Jasper's been through enough. He's found peace here, and I won't be the one to drag him back into that life. Fair enough, the man said as the deputies moved forward to bind his hands. I'll tell Mercer you said so. For what it's worth, I think he'd understand. The deputies led the 3 outlaws toward their horses, hands bound and faces resigned to their fate. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the ranch yard and illuminating the dust kicked up by so many boots and hooves. Cyrus stood watching, feeling the weight of his decision settle into his bones, not with regret, but with a kind of quiet peace he hadn't expected. As they prepared to mount up, the lead outlaw turned back one more time. His voice carried across the space between them, bitter but oddly respectful. You don't deserve that animal, he called out. Soft-hearted fool who lets murderers walk away. Cyrus met his gaze steadily, and when he spoke, his voice was calm and certain. Maybe not. But I'll spend every day trying to. The simplicity of that statement seemed to take the fight out of the man. He nodded once, then turned away as the marshal's party prepared to ride out. Before they left, Brennan approached Cyrus privately. There's something you should know, the marshal said, keeping his voice low. Jack Mercer himself is holed up about 20 miles from here in an old prospector's cabin. He's dying, like they said. Consumption's got him bad. He sent those men because he's too weak to travel. Cyrus absorbed this information without speaking. Thought you deserved to know, Brennan continued. In case you wanted to, well, I don't know what you'd want to do with that information. But it's yours now. Appreciate you telling me, Marshal, Cyrus said. But I've got no business with Jack Mercer. What he did, he'll answer for in his own time and in his own way. I'm done carrying that burden. Brennan studied him for a long moment, then nodded with approval. You're a better man than most, Cyrus Bell. World could use more like you. As the Marshal's party rode off with their prisoners, the tension that had gripped the ranch yard began to dissolve. The ranch hands dispersed slowly, returning to their morning duties with frequent glances back at Cyrus that held new understanding. Dutch Calloway was the last to leave, pausing to extend his hand in a gesture that spoke volumes. I was wrong about you, Bell, Dutch said gruffly. Called you soft when I should have seen you as something else entirely. Takes more strength to show mercy than to demand revenge. I see that now. Cyrus shook his hand, surprised by the firmness of the grip and the genuine respect in the foreman's eyes. We all see what we're ready to see, Dutch. No hard feelings. Still, Dutch said, I aim to do better. If you need anything for yourself or that donkey, you just say the word. As Dutch walked away, Tommy practically ran over, his face flushed with emotion and questions bubbling over. Mr. Bell, The young man struggled to find words adequate to what he'd witnessed. You let them go. After what they didn't let them go, Cyrus corrected gently. The marshal arrested them. The law will handle whatever comes next. I just chose not to add my voice to the chorus of condemnation. But why? Tommy asked, genuinely trying to understand. They worked for the man who killed Miss Sarah. They did, Cyrus agreed. And that's a heavy thing to carry. But Tommy, I learned something important these past weeks, something that old donkey taught me just by surviving. Sometimes standing still is braver than charging forward. Sometimes choosing not to fight is the hardest battle you'll ever win. Tommy nodded slowly, processing this wisdom with the serious consideration of youth, encountering profound truth for the first time. I think I understand, Mr. Bell, or at least I'm beginning to. That's all any of us can do, Cyrus said, clapping the young man on the shoulder. Keep beginning to understand every day of your life. Emma had waited patiently throughout these exchanges, but now she approached with a wrapped bundle in her hands. Her eyes were bright with emotion that she'd carefully controlled during the confrontation, but now threatened to overflow. I made something for you, she said. For Jasper, really. Been working on it for weeks. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a halter, not the rough, worn thing that Jasper wore now, but a sturdy, beautifully crafted piece of leather work. The straps were strong but supple, the stitching even and careful. She'd tooled a simple pattern into the leather, small flowers that Sarah might have appreciated. Emma, this is... Cyrus's voice caught. This is fine work. Thought he deserved something that showed he was valued, Emma said. Thought you both did? Together they walked to Jasper's stall. The donkey stood in a patch of morning sunlight that streamed through the high window, his coat glossy from Cyrus's constant care, his eyes calm and trusting. When Cyrus entered the stall, Jasper immediately came to him, pressing his soft nose against Cyrus's chest in greeting. Got something for you. Old friend, Cyrus murmured, carefully removing the worn, tattered halter that had been on Jasper since the day he'd found him. The not wanted note had long since been removed, but the halter itself still carried the memory of rejection and abandonment. As Cyrus slipped the new halter over Jasper's head, adjusting the straps with gentle hands, something shifted in the air of that stable. It was a small moment, witnessed only by Emma and the donkey himself, but it felt monumental, a physical representation of new beginnings, of leaving the past behind while honoring what it had taught them. There now, Cyrus said, stepping back to admire Emma's handiwork. That's better, isn't it? A halter for a donkey who's wanted, for a creature who has a home. Jasper shook his head, testing the feel of the new leather, then settled with a contented sigh. Emma wiped at her eyes, not bothering to hide the tears that came from witnessing this simple act of transformation. The ranch hands, who'd been watching from a distance, began a slow applause. It started with Tommy, then spread to Dutch, then to every man who'd witnessed what had transpired this morning. It wasn't for the halter, though that was beautiful. It wasn't even for Cyrus's mercy toward the outlaws, though that had impressed them. It was for something harder to name, for the way one man's stubborn kindness had changed the way they all saw the world. As the applause faded, Cyrus stood alone with Jasper one more time, his hand resting on the donkey's neck, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat beneath his palm. "You saved me," he whispered so quietly that only the animal could hear. "You reminded me who I wanted to be, who Sarah believed I could be. I'll never forget that." Jasper turned his head, those dark, intelligent eyes meeting Cyrus's gaze with what looked remarkably like understanding. In that moment, Cyrus understood that salvation was rarely a single dramatic event. More often, it was a series of small choices: to show kindness when cruelty would be easier, to stand firm when yielding would be simpler, to believe that every life, no matter how damaged or rejected, held within it the possibility of redemption. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the earth and everything on it. The crisis had passed. Justice would follow its course. And Cyrus Bell, once broken by loss and hollowed by grief, stood whole again in the morning light, ready to face whatever came next, with the quiet courage that comes from choosing love over hate, mercy over vengeance, and hope over despair. 6 weeks passed like water flowing over smooth stones, each day adding to the gentle reshaping of Cyrus Bell's life. Autumn settled over Hollow Creek with its characteristic grace, cottonwoods turning gold along the creek bed, mornings crisp enough to see your breath, evenings long and peaceful as the sun painted the desert in shades of amber and rose. Cyrus had made a decision during those weeks, one that surprised even him with its rightness. Using every dollar he'd saved from 15 years of ranch work, plus a small loan from the bank that Robert Hartwell had personally guaranteed, he purchased a modest plot of land just outside town. 5 acres of decent grazing, a small cabin that needed work, and a barn that had seen better days but still stood solid and true. The sign went up on a Saturday morning, carved by Cyrus's own hands with Tommy's eager assistance. The young man had improved considerably with woodworking under Cyrus's patient instruction, and together they'd created something simple but meaningful. The wood was sanded smooth, the letters burned deep. Bell's Rest, a place for second chances. "You really think folks will bring you their unwanted animals?" Tommy asked, standing back to admire their work. "Some will," Cyrus said. "And even if they don't, Jasper and I will be content. Sometimes you don't need a grand purpose. Sometimes taking care of one life well is purpose enough." But the townsfolk did come, drawn by the story that had spread through Hollow Creek like wildflowers after rain, the story of a man who'd saved a rejected donkey and in doing so had saved himself. They brought animals others had given up on, an old cow too ancient for milk but still deserving of comfort, a 3-legged dog that had been scheduled for shooting, a horse gone blind in one eye that no longer served its purpose in the mines. Cyrus took them all in with the same patient care he'd shown Jasper. He built additional shelters with Tommy's help, installed water troughs, created spaces where damaged creatures could heal at their own pace. Emma visited regularly, bringing vegetables from her garden and staying to help with the feeding. Her presence had become as natural as breathing, though neither of them had spoken of anything beyond friendship. There was time for that if it was meant to be. For now, the easy companionship was enough. On a particularly clear afternoon, Cyrus found himself at Sarah's grave for the first time since starting his new venture. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the valley, and her marker stood beneath an old oak tree that she would have loved. He'd been coming here once a month for 12 years, usually to stand in silence with his hat in his hands and his heart full of unspoken grief. Today was different. "I brought you something," he said, settling onto the ground beside her stone. From his pocket, he pulled Sarah's Bible, the one he'd carried during the confrontation with the outlaws. The one filled with her notes about grace and forgiveness. "I've been reading what you wrote in the margins," he continued, his voice conversational, as if she might actually hear him. "All those passages you underlined about second chances and redemption. I think I finally understand what you were trying to tell me, even back then. You knew life would be hard. You knew we'd face loss and pain. But you believed, truly believed, that kindness was the answer. That love was stronger than hate, even when hate felt easier." He told her about the new place, about the animals finding refuge there. He told her about Tommy's growth, about Dutch's change of heart, about Emma's patient friendship. He told her about Jasper, who stood even now by the cemetery gate, waiting with the endless patience that only donkeys possess. "I'm building something good," Cyrus said. "Something that honors what you taught me. And Sarah, I'm happy, really happy, for the first time since you left. I hope that makes you glad." The wind rustled through the oak leaves above him, and Cyrus chose to believe that was answer enough when Marshal Brennan stopped by Bell's Rest the following week. He brought news that Cyrus had been half expecting. Jack Mercer had died in the prospector's cabin, the consumption finally claiming him. He'd never known that his men had failed to retrieve the donkey, had passed believing that small piece of his daughter still waited for him somewhere in the territory. "Thought you should know," Brennan said. "Don't expect it changes much for you, but it closes the chapter on that business." "Appreciate you telling me," Cyrus replied. And he found, to his surprise, that he felt something like pity for the man who'd destroyed his life. They'd both lost everything to violence and grief. But while Cyrus had found his way back to living, Mercer had died, still trapped in the prison of his rage and sorrow. Dutch Calloway's visit came as the biggest surprise. The foreman arrived on a Sunday, driving a wagon loaded with supplies, lumber, nails, bags of feed, and a set of tools that looked expensive. "From the boys at the ranch," Dutch said gruffly, avoiding Cyrus's eyes. "We took up a collection. Figured you could use the help getting that place of yours properly set up." The gesture moved Cyrus more than he could articulate. These men who'd once mocked him for his softness now supported his mission with their hard-earned wages. "Dutch, I don't know what to say." "Don't say nothing," Dutch replied. "Just keep doing what you're doing. You're teaching this whole town something it needed to learn. Teaching me, anyway. That kindness isn't weakness. That mercy takes more guts than revenge ever could." As autumn deepened toward winter, Bell's Rest became an established part of the Hollow Creek landscape. Children visited with their parents to see the rescued animals. Young couples courted while walking through the peaceful grounds. The town doctor, observing the effect the place had on people's spirits, began recommending visits to his patients suffering from melancholy, and every evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Cyrus would find his way to Jasper's stall, larger now, better appointed but still the donkey's favorite spot. He'd brush the grey coat until it gleamed, check the hooves, ensure fresh water and good hay were within reach. Then he'd stand for a moment, one hand resting on Jasper's neck, feeling the warmth and strength of this creature who'd been rejected and discarded, but who'd survived to teach one broken man that survival itself could be an act of grace. Sometimes Emma would join him, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. Sometimes Tommy would appear, eager to share something he'd learned or accomplished. Sometimes Cyrus stood alone with just the donkey for company, and that was enough too. On those quiet evenings, Cyrus often found himself smiling, truly smiling, not the bitter grimace that had passed for contentment during his grief-stricken years, but the genuine expression of a man who'd found his way back to joy. He'd look at Jasper, this ordinary donkey who'd been nobody's first choice, who'd been marked not wanted and left to die, and he'd see reflected back the truth that had saved them both. Sometimes the greatest courage is showing kindness when the world calls you a fool. Sometimes saving what nobody else wants can save you. The wind would carry Emma's laugh from the cabin, or Tommy's excited voice calling out that another visitor had arrived with an animal in need. The stars would emerge one by one in the darkening sky, and Cyrus Bell, 62 years old and finally at peace, would lean his forehead against Jasper's warm neck and whisper the same words he spoke every evening. "Thank you, old friend. Thank you for reminding me who I wanted to be." Jasper would huff softly, his breath warm in the cool evening air. And together they'd stand in the comfortable silence of two souls who'd found in each other exactly what they needed. Not to forget the past, but to build a future worth living. Not to erase the scars, but to prove that even the most damaged hearts could heal if given patience, kindness, and the simple faith that tomorrow might be better than today. And in that small stable, in that quiet corner of the Arizona Territory, two rejected creatures had found their home at last.